Okay, we now come to the second part of today's meetup. And for this part, we have Mike Cavaliere, who's going to be talking about full stack Jamstack fun. And in this talk, Mike will walk through building a functional Jamstack app using Next.js, Prisma, NextAuth, Chakra-UI, and other fun things. And in case you're not familiar, Mike Cavaliere has been quite active in the Prisma ecosystem. He's been doing full stack web development, for a while. He's a senior engineering strategist at Echobind and the author of Cut Into The Jamstack, build and deploy a full stack application using React and Next.js. So with that, I'm now excited to bring you Mike. How's it going, Mike?
Hey, Daniel. Good to see you as always.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I hope that, your family is growing, right? And in the meanwhile, you're writing books, you're giving talks, and you're also a senior strategist at Echobind. So I find it quite fascinating how you manage to juggle all of that.
Yeah, I do too sometimes. But hey, you got to pay for all these kids, so you got to work hard. No, but it's this is like my getaway in a lot of ways. So I have my family time, and creating content and presenting is like the counterbalance. It nourishes the creative needs. So I'm glad to do it. So thanks for having me on as always.
Great. Well, are you ready to share your screen?
I am. Let me pop over to it. Let's see. Just make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay. Give me 1 second. Can you see my slides?
Yep. So I'm going to bring it up to the stage, and the stage will be yours, Mike.
All right. Thank you. Title of this talk is Full Stack Jamstack Fun. I love working a lot with the Jamstack, particularly with tools like Next.js and Prisma. And, these are tools I like to do demos with. And in this case, I wanted to come up with an app that was specifically for the Prisma talk, and something that utilized Prisma and my other favorite tools, and something that was kind of time boxed and had a little bit of a fun element to it. So let's move ahead. Daniel already gave you a quick bio about me, but I want you to know that I've been working with a lot of technologies over the years. I've touched Ruby on Rails and PHP for quite an amount of time. And JavaScript is probably the one that I've worked with the longest. And nowadays, React and React Native are all I work with as far as the front end goes. And the Jamstack is my default go-to for the web, particularly with Next.js. Some people may or may not know what the Jamstack is. It's becoming a lot more popular as a term in the developer community nowadays, but I do feel like it's just worth breaking down. The Jamstack is a term coined by the Netlify people to refer to an architecture that is now becoming more and more popular. And I think most of you know the acronym, but Jam in Jamstack stands for JavaScript APIs and Markup. And what that ends up meaning is that instead of the previously common way of developing web applications where you hit a single web page and it goes through the whole application stack of either Ruby or .NET code, for example, touches the database, does a bunch of calculating to create an HTML page and render it. We know that on most requests, at least for static HTML pages, we don't need to do all that calculation. So the Jamstack says, put all the thinking in your API and create static HTML pages at build time, which ends up having a ton of benefits to it. Number one being that the stack is really fast because rendering an HTML page takes far less time than rendering a full application page. When you do need to render dynamic information, you're pulling it from the API and injecting it into the ready rendered page. That in turn has benefits on SEO. Google likes fast pages, especially when it comes to mobile pages. Mobile is really important these days. Has an impact on security because your footprint is reduced. Instead of an entire page with lots of different application code that is potentially attackable, now it's reduced to whatever APIs you're pulling. And if you're using third-party APIs, those are in turn doing their own measures for security. Or if you're building your own API, you're doing your security there. You're not doing it for the rest of the stuff that's rendered on the page. Scalability is huge in the Jamstack because you don't have to do anything to scale an HTML page. It's inherently scalable. You can host it on anything from Amazon S3 to just a regular file server. and then the API can live pretty much anywhere else. And in addition, it could be both the front and the back end could be fully serverless. The HTML page can live on a serverless instance, and so can the API. And serverless in general is much more cheap than running a full-time application server 24/7. But lastly, the biggest benefit of the Jamstack that is relevant for this discussion is developer experience. And it's become a new term for just how enjoyable the stack is to work with, how easy certain things are, how quick your code changes appear, and all the other things that make development actually enjoyable and taking away or reducing the sucky stuff as much as possible. The stack that I normally use is very high on the developer experience end, at least in my own opinion. Next.js is a phenomenal framework in terms of developer experience. It wraps React, which I really love working with, and it takes what used to be really challenging with a full stack React application and makes it a lot easier. So namely, creating pages is really easy. Creating like full stack isomorphic pages. It used to be in React land, if you wanted to have an isomorphic React app, you would have to do something a little bit differently if the person was coming directly to a subpage's URL, as opposed to navigating there through the website. You had to deal with like window.push state. You had to inject the front end content from the server side into the HTML template. And Next.js like takes all of that away. You don't have to do any of that anymore. All you have to do to have a full stack route in your application, a page, is just create a file in the pages directory. And the same goes for JSON API endpoints. If you need an API endpoint for the rest of your application to connect to, you just create a TypeScript or JavaScript file in the pages API directory, and the rest of your application will be able to fetch from it. So that among many other reasons is why I use Next.js as default. It's also got some built-in performance tooling that just makes your web applications really fast by default. And it's just all around great to work with. Database-wise, Postgres and Prisma are usually my go-to. Postgres because I like working with relational data, at least when I'm starting an application, because you can take it in any direction. You could do your data modeling, and if you find out like you have something that warrants a NoSQL application, you could always move it over to that. But by default, Postgres is just so scalable and so stable. Like you could use it for any general purpose and take it in any direction. And likewise, Prisma is, as we all know, is a great RM because it lets you deal with the fun things of creating a database schema and managing your data, and kind of not have to worry about some of the more tedious things like worrying about creating the database migrations and such. Querying your data is really easy with it too. Data fetching, traditionally I'll use either SWR or React Query. SWR is what I reach for first, just because it's really simple and fast. If I don't have to do anything complicated with caching or query manipulation, and I just want to fetch some data, I'll just plop SWR in. Chakra, likewise, is just a great UI library. It's fast, it's accessible, and it's a joy to work with. And for authentication, I always reach for NextAuth because it makes logging into things with one click with either GitHub or Google or Facebook or whatever you want to log in with. It makes that process much more seamless. And again, you don't have to think about the authentication process. You just paste in a bunch of code, pick your providers, and go. And it works really well with Prisma as well. So now, specifically for this talk, I thought to myself, I wanted to build something on the front end with this stack that I love. And at Echobind, the company I work for, all the developers and designers get roughly 7 hours a week of personal investment time. And when we utilize that time, we could spread it over multiple weeks or do something in a particular week. And since this talk was coming up, I wanted to be able to ship an application that we could all interact with. And obviously, like if I was doing it in my investment time for 1 week, it had to be kind of capped at 7 hours, and I had to be able to build something useful in that time. I wanted to use the Jamstack because that's what I love to focus on these days. And because I was limited on time, I wanted to make sure that I didn't invent the wheel or get into the cycle of like, oh, I can do this better. I wanted to use existing tools as much as possible and focus on what was making the app unique, what was the enjoyable part of it. And also for projects like this, I never really like to spend money. I like to ship little projects like this all the time whenever I can, whether it's like for personal reasons or for business reasons. I think that there's so many tools out there in the open source world and in the hosting world that you should avoid spending money as much as possible. That's why I particularly leverage things like Vercel, and Netlify has free plans, and many of the APIs that I use have free plans. And then lastly, I wanted to have fun doing it, and that's where the developer experience comes in. So the thing that I came up with is Emoji Battle, and it's the makings of a game. It's not full-fledged interactive like Fortnite game, obviously, because what can you do with the Jamstack? You do a lot, it turns out, but this is what I could do in 7 hours. And so the concept of the game is just you have an emoji picker, we all log in, and when we click emojis, the ones with the most votes go to the top. And there's a lot we can do with it, but for now, why don't we just check it out? And I'm going to, let's see, switch my screen, I think. Actually, no, I can share this browser too. Can you see my other tabs, Daniel?
Yes.
Okay. So if everyone goes to emoji-battle.vercel.app, I'll also paste it in the chat. You can log in with your GitHub username. And I don't think I can paste it in the chat right now. I might be locked out of it, but I'll paste it in the private chat. But anybody who comes here can come in and you can start clicking emoji and you'll see it update in near real time. So it'll show whoever logs in. So your name will be visible. So if you don't want to log in, I understand. But if you do log in and you're okay with your name being visible, it'll show up here once you start voting on stuff. And so if anybody pops in and you start clicking some of the emoji that we've got here, you'll see that the ones with the most votes will start propagating to the top. And as you can see, these are peppering in, and the one at the top is going to keep getting bigger and bigger. So if you've got a really fast hand, you can win pretty easily right now with the game dynamics that we have available. But let's see how far we can take it. Okay, so this guy's got 3 votes over here. Oh, we got 8 votes coming in. Oh, we've got a near winner. All right. So there's no real limit and there's no real winning. So we can kind of click on this all day long and see what happens. And we did that a little bit internally at Echobind. It was kind of fun. So for the time being, the only way to determine the winner is go, oh, this is the winner. And then I go, boom, reset game. And then we just start all the fun all over again. And whoever's clicking the peach is clearly still clicking it. You are a champion. Oh, we've got avocados coming in first. So this is the game in a nutshell, and this is the kind of fun stuff you could build with a stack like this in less than a day. And this kind of thing could be taken way further. I think there's a lot of things that can make it actually fun, like animations and, I don't know, some kind of interaction between the emoji. So with that, you can feel free to keep clicking. I'm going to open this in the background, and I know that people are going to keep clicking it because, I don't know, for some reason, clicking an emoji is really addictive. But back to the slides that I've got. So let's talk a little bit about the breakdown of the app and what it is in here. And I see the avocados winning, so I'm just going to reset and keep on going. So we really only have 2 pages, which are actually 1 page in here. So the main page of the emoji application is one giant single page application. And there's a little conditional in it that says, if you're not logged in, here's the button to log in. And that's what you all saw when you first went to the app URL. And once you click that, NextAuth is handling the login. That's why you see that the button to log into GitHub isn't styled, because that's just a boilerplate with NextAuth. But you can style that really easily with NextAuth. I have a series of articles on this. You can take a look. Their documentation is also great. Our schema is really simple. The user model, and there's also 2 other models that you don't see here, the account and sessions model. That's all copy and pasted from NextAuth's documentation, because NextAuth works well with Prisma. You just place those in and you start modifying them to your needs. In my case, there's custom models for emoji and vote. And when you're clicking an emoji, it's just inserting the emoji into the database if it doesn't already exist, and it's recording 1 vote entry. And the schema reflects that over here and here. And then all we have is associations between users and votes. And then the vote is a mapping table between users and emoji. So that's really it. It's an extremely simple schema, and Prisma makes it really easy to work with. And query, which you'll see in a little bit. The application itself, it's a Next.js application, and the React elements are pretty simple. Header is just a couple of very simple elements using Chakra-UI. You just drop it in, and I think I just adjusted the size on this content. There's not even any styling here. This emoji picker is a plugin called Emoji Mart, which I thought I linked here, but I think it's on another slide. The leaderboard queries the backend and pulls up an aggregate query, which shows you the top winning emoji. And the user list is going to show who's online based on the votes. I'll go into detail on these in a second. So here's the emoji picker. So Missive Emoji Mart is the plugin that just lists all those out. So going along with the theme of using existing libraries, I did a Google search. I found that this was an emoji picker, threw it right in and connected it to the React state. When you click one, so there's an on-click handler, and that just does a JavaScript fetch that posts to this API endpoint. So if you remember in Next.js, creating an API endpoint is as simple as creating a file. In this case, it's a TypeScript file because I always use TypeScript by default these days. And the beginning of a Next.js API route just starts with this. It's just a function, async function you export. If you're using TypeScript like I am, it just has these types, which are pretty easy to copy and paste. You check the request method to make sure that the person is using a post and not a get, and return an error status otherwise. And then this get session handler comes from NextAuth. So that's the other great thing about NextAuth is, if you think about Next.js, Next.js is the front of the front end and the back of the front end at the same time. It's got the React components and it's got serverless functions in these API routes. If you were to build the authentication manually, you would have to log in on either the front end or the back end and then communicate it to the other side. NextAuth, the great thing about it is it handles it for you. So once you're logged in in both places. So the get session handler is what you pull in the API routes to just check the authenticated session. So here we use the get session handler for NextAuth. We check that the session exists, otherwise we return a 401, and then we pull the user object from there because we're going to use it in our database query. So in the second part of the same API route, and I put it on two screens just because the code was a little long and you wouldn't be able to see it. The rest is up to Prisma. So we pull in the information about the emoji that we're passing in from the front end, the ID, name, the native code. There's a colon variable, so it just pulls in like what this emoji looks like. I think if you were to use it in Slack or something, it's unnecessary here, but I'm just recording it. And then you just take that information from the request body and then you pass it to Prisma upsert, and that lets us insert the emoji into the database if it doesn't already exist. If it does exist, it doesn't do anything with it. The where query is just looking for an existing record by this unified parameter, which I think is the emoji itself. I forget, but it was unique. I think it's actually the UTF-8 codes for it. But either way, I found that was a unique criterion that I could search on. And if it doesn't exist in the database, it inserts it. And the reason we're inserting it is because we want to be able to join on it later. So when we're pulling the information out of the database, that's when we're going to do the joins on the emoji. So in this, back in the API endpoint for creation, we upsert the emoji and then we add a single vote, because every time you click in it, it's just recording a single vote. And it just connects the emoji to the user object using the connect parameter. So the leaderboard and the user list components both follow similar paradigms, where they're just using SWR hook to fetch a single API endpoint that we've created at a 200 millisecond interval. Now, this is the quickest way I could develop this. There's certainly better ways to make it faster, but for an MVP, minimum viable product, this is a great way to do it. And the cool thing is, one Prisma call does everything. So this is the emoji list endpoint that I created in Next.js, which has a similar header and footer to the previous endpoint. So I'm just listing here the parts that are unique to it. And the part that is unique to it is the Prisma query. And we're using a find many to get all the emoji that fall into a particular window. So using the where clause, it's basically, so we're saying, give me all emoji, joining on votes. So we've got an include on the votes. Not an include, but I'm sorry, we're saying votes is true, which I think is a shortcut for the include. And we're getting a count of those votes. So within the select clause, I love this new feature in Prisma where you can use _count and then say, give me the aggregate counts of all the votes for a given emoji. And then I'm filtering out votes that are older than 15 minutes ago, because that's how we're treating a given session. And that's the quickest way to limit the rounds of the game by session. We're just saying, okay, 15 minutes ago doesn't count. It's not like I'm doing demos every 15 minutes anyway, so that's a good filter. And then I'm sorting them in order by clause by the most votes first. And that's what makes the other ones go up to the top. And then in the leaderboard component, I don't have the code here, but I'm just saying, give me a font size that is based on the number of votes, and just multiply it by a factor of, I think it's 3 or 5 or something like that. User list is similar. I've got a fetcher using the SWR hook for the list endpoint, and the list endpoint similarly uses find many to pull up the votes that were in the last last 15 minutes. But I'm calling it on user. So I'm aggregating user votes and saying, omit any users for whom you've had votes created outside of the last 15 minutes. And then I'm just listing out the users, and it's showing everybody who's been online in the last 15 minutes. So if you did log in and your name was on there, it'll be gone in 15 minutes regardless, in case you're worried about your privacy. So that's the entire application. The source code is online in the GitHub repo. You can totally take a look at it. And if you feel like contributing or hacking on something like this that's interesting, please feel free. There's plenty we could do here. Animation, I think, will make this a little bit more fun. Framer motion is included in Chakra. And if you haven't seen Framer motion, it's got great declarative animation capabilities that you can do some really amazing stuff with. That would take a lot of effort in CSS, and then Framer motion, it's just really easy. WebSockets would be the next thing I do here to get the updating a lot more real time, because I think that's going to be make it a little more fun that you don't have to wait for that delay. It's a little odd. And we can actually do this now because there's free APIs out there that allow you to do WebSockets. So that's going to be a coming thing if I work on this again. And then the dynamics here, I think we could do a lot more with making it fun and engaging. Animation is going to play a big part in that. But I think the interactivity of it and giving you the ability to people to like click on the ones that are on the leaderboard and take a point away could be real fun. So what is worth learning about this experience? So we already know, I think the Jamstack is great, but it's applicable to a lot of situations. You can use it in the enterprise to speed up existing web applications. You could use it for MVPs if you want to scaffold a software as a software as a service application together really quickly. You could use it for a website, a static website that's driven by a CMS. You could use it for any kind of application you want. And particularly in this set of tools, the developer experience makes it really enjoyable to use, because while you're coding it, you're seeing the results of your changes really quickly, including full stack changes like this. Building fun things like this is a great way to just get better and really appreciate the tools that you're using. So I highly recommend all of you do it. And that's it. Here's the source code again. There's my contact info. Please reach out to me about the Jamstack or anything like it at any time. This is a link to my book where I go in depth on building a software as a service application with the Jamstack, which is a lot more involved than something like this. But it also, once you grasp these tools, you can build anything a lot quicker than you normally would have, because the tools themselves can work really quickly. And info about myself and my company is there. And that's it.
Mike, that was really great. Thank you so much for that. Let me just change the name tag. Okay, there we go. We have it. We had a bunch of questions. I also had a question, but let's maybe first get into some of the questions that we had from the users. So Ricardo had a question. He asked, "I get the awesome routing feature of Next.js, but what other advantages does it have over React and Vite?"
That's a good question. I haven't compared it to Vite immensely, and I haven't really worked with Vite. Is that the way you say it, Vite? Vite? I know I've seen the name around, but I haven't like delved into it yet. I can compare it a little bit to something like Vue. Vue, I know, is really embraced by the developer community, but when I was looking at it, like there's actually Next.js, which is like a Next.js clone for Vue. I do know that it doesn't have quite the level of feature support as Next does, and I know that Next has Vercel backing it, which they've gotten many millions of dollars in investment. So there's just a lot of effort going forth on it. I can't comment on Vite, sorry, without knowing it much better. But if you feel free to drop me a tweet or an email, and if you have particular features of Vite that you think are relevant, I can tell you what the parallels in Next.js are, or maybe you'll teach me something and there's reason to use Vite over Next.js.
Thanks for the answer. And then we also had Chris, who asked, "Mike, why did you map camel case to snake case in your Prisma schema? I know traditionally Postgres uses snake case, but not sure why to use it in the context of Prisma."
That's a good question. I was doing that while I was noodling with NextAuth. And so NextAuth, in their most recent version, they've converted everything to a mono repo. So the documentation for the Prisma adapter is different now, and things were a little out of sync. So I think I grabbed that snippet initially from an older version of NextAuth. So I probably just did that to get it done very quickly. I don't have a strong preference. I do know that people, I have heard of people running into some oddities or quirks when using camel case in Postgres, but I don't know exactly what they were. I don't have a strong opinion on either. Like I like using both, and I'm totally okay with both. I do like the reduced syntax of having, just the Prisma camel case translate over to the database. So that's what I normally do. In this case, I was just copy and pasting code and saying, okay, this works, let's go with it for now. But no strong opinions there.
Got it. And one final question that I have regarding NextAuth. So I've played around with NextAuth. It was already a couple of months ago. I think it was before the major release increment that they had recently. And I'm curious, sort of, how do you sort of, so NextAuth allows you to say use GitHub as an authentication using the OAuth flow. I'm curious though, how do you persist users in your database? Do you do that in the callback, or do you just essentially get this token as, I guess, an HTTP only cookie that is passed essentially to all of the API endpoints, and then in the API endpoints you use that method that you get from NextAuth to verify the correctness of it, and then you just sort of rely on whatever the payload's there?
That's a great question. And I could show you a lot easier than I can tell you. It's really easy in NextAuth, and the answer is you do nothing. So if you look at the NextAuth.js file that you create right here, all you have to do is say, let's see, where did I even put it in here? Usually there's a database parameter. Maybe my version is out of sync. Let's check the NextAuth documentation really quick. So there's really just a database parameter that says this is what you're using. Check the documents really quick, but there's just a parameter in the adapter, and that's it. So if you go in here, configuration, databases, I think it's the documentation in the adapters, and you go to Prisma. Maybe it's just because you're using the Prisma adapter that it does it by default. And because you have a data source database, it just does it. So the answer is it's quite simple, and it does it automatically for you. I think you can certainly customize that behavior in the callbacks and such, but it automatically persists it when you create these session and user tables and such. I had to do no work.
If you go back to the code that you showed, what you showed essentially is this callback. It's an API route, and that's what you configure when you configure the GitHub application for your authentication. This is essentially what you configure as the callback endpoint.
So the callback in my case is just for additional functionality. The application would work fine without this. And this is what I had initially. It's just the Prisma adapter and the GitHub provider so that we could log in with GitHub. This is an override to the callback for sessions. And the only reason I did this is so that I could augment it and add the unique user ID from our database. That way I can join it in the Prisma calls to say this user voted on this emoji. That's the only reason this is here. So this is not necessary to get database storage.
I see. So essentially you're just calling whatever parameter you're getting in, and it seems to me that you're augmenting that with the ID that you use to persist the user account in your database, like essentially.
Exactly, yeah. Yep.
Right. Okay, thank you. That was a really good explanation. Thank you for that, and a really cool demo. I mean, you got us just clicking like mad people here. So, Mike, it's always fun having you present, and thank you. I hope to see you here soon.
It's my pleasure. Thanks again for having me, Daniel.